I definitely am lucky. I will not argue that. I've been able to be in positions where I was able to start this career and to, get the education that allowed me to get a foot in the door to these areas and to navigate that. But I do think there's a lot of hard work and play that you can once you're in those situations. So, if you're given luck, it's also how you use it, right? And you don't want to be the person who's really lucky and then you let that opportunity go by.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode 225. This is Clark. Jace, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Good. We got a question. Let's see from all of
you. Got to tell everybody Happy Valentine's real quick, though.
Yeah, Happy Valentine's. Yeah, when is that? That's when this
the day.
Come out.
Yeah,
the 14th. Yeah.
Happy Valentine's for all you lovers and those seeking lovers, right?
You got a surprise for your wife, or what's going on?
No, I got flowers. I have a weird relationship with flowers just because I feel like they always die so fast. But I got flowers a little while ago, which was a surprise. I never wanted to be that gets the flowers on the day of and can't find them. So I prepared a little early this year and got them a little early. And, we're going to a comedy show here. It was last week, got canceled with the ice storm in Texas, and it's going to be this week. And so that'll be kind of Valentine's this year for us. It's going to be great. Go to dinner too.
So there you go. I guess, I should get my flowers early too, but by the time people hear this, it'll already be too late. So that's that. All right. So question this week from Oliver. He says, great podcast. I really enjoy hearing about people's journey towards financial freedom. One of your recent podcasts got me thinking about some statistic where most wealth is lost if you pass it on. He's talking about to family. Most wealth is lost by the third generation. A couple of your guests have brought up the terms family office and dynasty trust. I was wondering how these strategies help preserve wealth through generations. So what do you think? Let's start with, family office is just a group of individuals that invest, right? Or pass family down or has enough money to invest. So I don't know that in itself is protection, right? It's just kind of an investing platform or tool. But what about for the trust, Jace?
Yeah, well, let's just go back real quick to the family office real quick. So just from a terminology and standpoint, I think that term is used in a couple different settings. The main ones we've seen are when a couple high net worth individuals will pool assets together and essentially possibly hire a chief investment officer or an analyst or a couple different people, have a team that will basically kind of oversee their portfolio investments. In some cases, an individual who's maybe even not higher net worth may kind of house that for themselves. And the intent is that, hey, we're bringing in a fiduciary. They're going to manage everything for the family, on a go-forward basis and that kind of thing. So that's where we've seen that terminology used most. I think it is something that's been a little bit more, I guess, more of recent as people have kind of set these family offices up, and there's all sorts of different, ways that in terms of the dynasty trust, those are for tax protection, trying to avoid the transfer taxes such as estate, gift, etc. And there's also mechanisms in these, but also other trusts where the person who is putting together the trust can put in mechanisms such that assets don't become available to heirs or anybody really to use unless certain conditions are met, whether that's age or net worth or getting a college degree or there's all sorts of random different things. I'm sure if you talk to an estate attorney, they could tell you some interesting stories on unlocking certain assets. But I think age, net worth, graduating college, buying a house, business, et cetera, those are kind of the main ones that I've been familiar with or seen.
Yeah, with you on that. All right, great. So this week we have Nick, net worth of 2.1. He's had a career working in tech for some major companies that most of us probably know and use every day. So fun to hear from him. Last week we had James, net worth of 1.2. He works as a realtor now, but didn't always. So that was a career switch that he made in his 30s. He worked as a project manager. So he shares his story and really emphasizes the importance of giving money away. He views himself as a steward for his money and talks about how when we give it away, it comes back even more. So really interesting perspective and fun to hear from him. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you have a question, go to our website, millionairesunveiled.com. You can hit Ask a Millionaire and submit a question either written or via SpeakPipe, or you can email us at millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. So thanks for tuning in. And without any further delay, let's get into this week's episode with Nick.
Nick, do you want to just give us a little about your background or what you're up to now?
Sure. I'm currently working in tech and have been doing the tech circuit for a while now. Before this, I was at Airbnb, and before that at Twitter, and then Facebook before that. And then before that was doing a bunch of different jobs, not in the tech field. I was doing a scholarship in Germany for a while, and then in college, and grew up near Boston, and doing a bunch of odd jobs throughout high school and in college as well.
Awesome. And we're going to get a little bit more into the career progression that you've made. But first, what is your net worth today?
It's a little bit of a moving target because I have some pre-IPO shares of my current job. So I kind of exclude that just because it's really hard to sort of gauge. But without that, it's about 2.1 million. If you include that, I would say it's around 2.5, but it could vary a little bit.
Awesome. And how is that broken up?
Well, a lot of it right now is in Airbnb shares. I would say a little over 1 million because there's some lockup periods and cap gains issues that I'm trying to navigate. So we're not allowed to sell for a period of time. We have a house, and I would say there's probably like $250,000 of equity in our house. And then we have a fair amount in cash right now, probably 100,000 because we're doing some renovations as we're preparing for a baby in a couple of months. And I would say the rest is in taxable or untaxable accounts, mostly in index funds.
Wow. So I want to get into all this, but first, I mean, the $1 million in a publicly traded company that you were working at, man, that's pretty phenomenal. How long were you there for?
Yes, very fortunate to be in a position. I was there for about 4.5 years. So worked there for a good amount of time and left about a year and a half ago.
Wow. So you plan to sell some of that, or do you plan to sell all of it when that lockup period ends?
Probably going to sell. That's a good question. I'm probably going to sell most of it, not all of it, just to diversify. I mean, I definitely see, wanting to ride the wave, but I definitely want to diversify a bit. But I'll probably also keep, maybe like $100,000, maybe a little bit more in Airbnb just to sort of navigate that and sort of, see how that goes as well, given that I worked so hard to get that equity as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I want to have a little conversation about this just because, one, it's pretty unique. I mean, obviously, there's lots of people potentially in your shoes out there with shares in VC-backed startups or private equity-backed companies, and you end up spending a good chunk of your time essentially earning sweat equity or whatever you want to call it. And then obviously, at a liquidity event, it becomes realized, right? And so you go through this period and you're extremely invested in that company, but you also don't have, as much decision-making power, at least in some of the roles that maybe we're discussing here. Maybe at the executive level you do. Even then, sometimes you don't because your investors really start to take control of the company. But I mean, emotionally having let's call it almost a half of your net worth tied up in one company, emotionally, you said you get rid of maybe 900 of it. How do you go about thinking about that? And what has that kind of done along the ladder? I mean, as you are working there, was it, hey, yeah, I'm earning an extra couple hundred grand a year, as I'm here? Or was it more, hey, I'm working, we're on this mission. If this turns into something, financial gain on the shares, great. If not, oh, well, I'll move on.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty tricky. I mean, I think so. I guess when I was working there, it was, it's just sort of out of sight, out of mind because you don't have access to it. And it's been a little bit surreal going from, knowing that sort of is there to sort of suddenly having more access to that liquidity. But I think in the moment, and what I would tell people too is, to do your standard investing, like you normally would, right? Of, your typical trying to reduce your expenses and invest as you can. And, because there's no guarantee that stock is going to be what you think it will be. Obviously got particularly lucky in this situation, but, it could have, 9 months ago could have gone a very different direction. I think we both have been, my wife and I have been both very, keen on sort of living, financially responsible lives and doing that. And then similarly having a plan in place for when you do go public, and sort of what your motivations and your goals are, because it's a pretty big shift all of a sudden where you go from, not having access to the capital to suddenly having a huge gap, a huge sort of windfall where you have to sort of navigate that. And that can be overwhelming to some people. I've seen, people blow a lot of money or lose a lot of money doing the wrong decision in that situation. And, other people who, are now basically retired. So.
Yeah. I mean, as you've gone through this journey with these companies, have you seen people kind of, that you worked with cash out and retire on these deals?
A lot of the really, I would say yeah, the short answer is yes. But there's a lot of people who are, I think, workaholics in this space who are, very, very well off and probably don't need to work anymore, but they do, and they stay in this industry and these companies just because I think they like, the influence and impact they can have on these kind of roles in these companies. But definitely have seen, a fair share of people just sort of bow out or really change and pivot their career to something, just completely different. People became like a baker or that, and other people who just, took time off and then sort of came back into things. But, and the reality is they don't actually have to work. And, I think the FIRE movement, I don't know if it's quite as popular with the tech people. Like I don't talk about it at work with people, but, I think there's more of like a work hard culture and this and that sort of keeps people in that.
Yeah, totally. What category would you put yourself in amongst that crowd?
I mean, I enjoy my job right now. I didn't always. There's definitely been points in my career where, part of my motivation for the FIRE movement is, I know I probably won't always want to do this, and I probably want to do something different. And, having the financial freedom to sort of make those decisions or not be beholden to, certain politics in a company if it goes sour or whatever, that to me is really appealing. But for the time being, I'm really happy with what I do. I find my work fulfilling and interesting. But when I look, 10 years down the road and, with a kid on the way, there's probably a point in my career where I don't want to, be quite as involved in my work in the capacity I am right now and spend more of my time focused on other things.
So what drives you now, Nick? Is it similar? You mentioned some of those people stay in the space because they feel like they want to help build something or be part of the company. Is that the same for you right now?
Yeah, I definitely think so. So my career, I work specifically on safety issues and things like that, which is a pretty interesting field in the tech space that's going through a lot of changes. And it's really interesting to sort of be a part of that and see how these companies are evolving that space and sort of be a part of really the founding of that industry. And I would say sort of profession as it's starting to grow and, being a part of these companies early on and studying their foundation. Like a lot of the companies I start, I specifically look for companies where they're really starting to grow quickly and going to really scaling places and where I think I can have an impact. And I just find that kind of work really interesting and fulfilling. It can be stressful at times, but definitely rewarding.
How did the tech start? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, Airbnb, Facebook, Twitter, Stripe. It's quite the lineup. How did it start? What was the initial job or how did you get that?
Yeah, it wasn't always that way. So I graduated college. I went to school in Connecticut and graduated college right around the time of the recession. So it was 2008 or the last recession. And, it was pretty hard because, going out of school, you're, looking forward to, what was a booming job market before that. And then, not really, having that. And, there was a guy I went to college with and he worked at this company at the time, which, wasn't very big then called Facebook. And, was trying to sort of hire, people, to help with some of their customer support. And I had applied also to a different thing at the time, there's a scholarship program called Fulbright. I was like, Facebook, it won't be that interesting. And, and then, I took the Fulbright and I lived in Germany for a couple of years doing some research and teaching and, doing the European travel lifestyle. And, if I had pursued that a little bit earlier, I might be a little bit earlier on the retirement journey, but, was fortunate enough when I came back then, similarly, trying to sort of find jobs and came back after Germany, moved back near Boston where I grew up. And, it was a bit of a hard landing because, you're going from, this, pretty independent lifestyle back living at home. And I was doing a bunch of odd jobs, working as like a baker and whatever. And then reached out again to the people who I talked to a couple years before that about this position after, not making much progress there. And, I picked up some language skills at the time, which let me get a foot in the door. And the timing, the rest is history there. So I got in at Facebook early on in one of their operations teams, doing, what was, not really fun work, to be honest. It was a lot of content review of really bad stuff. And during when, Facebook was scaling very, very quickly and working on a lot of their internet safety things early on. And then, was able to leverage that experience into sort of more specialized roles like escalations and policy teams. And then by sort of developing certain skills and expertise and sort of being able to move around internally, I've been able to, carve out a specific niche for myself within these companies where there's an increasing demand and not too many people with the skill set I have. So that's been helpful.
Yeah, really neat. And then I guess how long did you stay at each of these? Is it just a couple years stint or a few years stint at each?
So when I was at Facebook, I was there for just about 4 years as well, and a couple of different roles there. And then at Twitter, I was only at Twitter for about a year, and then at Airbnb for a little over 4 years, and now Stripe, where I've been for about a year and a half now.
So the equity piece on Airbnb, or the options rather, how does that happen? Was it when you first joined? Is that something they incentivized you with after you were there for a certain time and invested? Did you get a promotion and they gave it to you? When did those options come to you?
Yeah. Like usually with these roles, like your initial grant, especially with the companies, tends to be like the biggest one. So because the company's valuation, hopefully if it goes well, changes in a positive direction over your tenure. So that's usually like your biggest one. And I was there after. There's different kinds of stock options. I came in after they had sort of stopped issuing what's called ISOs, which are a different kind of stock option where you basically, or you have access to buy shares at a certain price. So that's like for really, really early employees. But the types of shares they gave me were called restricted stock units. And basically what happens is during your time working there, you vest at certain cycles, that equity. And then when there's a liquidity event, you have access to those shares. So it suddenly becomes income. So you can't really do anything with those shares until there's actually a public offering or the company's acquired. And they do offer like equity refreshers, like I said, throughout, for performance reasons, or if you do well, or if you get a promotion, they revisit that. But generally speaking, like the initial grant tends to be the most lucrative.
So of your friends or those that you worked with at Airbnb, how many of them plan to hold on to these options if they had options long term? And how many of them say, hey, I just want out and I'm just going to sell and cash out?
I think so. Like there's like a Slack channel for Airbnb alumni, and I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag there, where I think some people, are selling most, and then other people are diversifying more. I would say like the people I know, like a lot of people, I definitely think are diversifying either because you have all this deferred income and, you haven't been able to access that. So they might have life goals, like buying a house or paying off debt that they want to do as well.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by LoanSteady. As regular listeners know, we love companies that can improve your financial well-being. We vet sponsors carefully to make sure that they can deliver a great experience to our listeners. So if you're in the market for a home loan or interested perhaps in refinancing or would like to take cash out for a special project or home improvements, especially before rates potentially rise this year, check out LoanSteady. They have 350 5-star Google reviews, so customers leave happy. They have a special offer for listeners of Millionaires Unveiled. Before April 1, go to www.loansteady.com/millionaire and apply. And LoanSteady will waive all lender fees, including application and processing fees. Important terms and conditions apply. For more licensing, please visit www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. This is LoanSteady LLC, NMLS number 1701910. equal housing lender. So get a rate today and see how LoanSteady can help you reach your financial goals. Go to www.loansteady.com/millionaire to get your special offer today. So Nick, you were on a little bit of a roller coaster with Airbnb, right? Because they were going to IPO and then the pandemic hit and then they were going to IPO through a SPAC and then they weren't and then they did IPO. And it IPO'd above what they were listing at. I mean, it seemed to me at least, I mean, you probably know more obviously being on the inside, but it seemed there was a little bit of back and forth.
Yeah, it was honestly super stressful. I feel very fortunate that I was able to, transition to my current job before all the pandemic stuff hit. But, I'm sure people remember, but at the beginning of COVID, travel like flatlined. And I think there's some interesting interviews of Brian Chesky around that time where he talks through that experience. But, they were planning on going public in March, I think, of that year, or filing to go public. And obviously things took a turn for the worst. And myself and a lot of other people too, there are people who had grants, and part of the grant agreement is that your grants expire after 7 years if you don't reach the liquidity event. So, in addition to sort of the delayed IPO because of COVID and seeing, the valuation go from, a pretty significant portion to, going way, way down and trying to plan around that to potentially having, some of your shares, a significant portion of your shares, becoming canceled for, them not being able to go public in time was, it's a pretty big emotional roller coaster to navigate and trying to deal with that. I guess, there was a lot else going on at that time. So, there was a lot to sort of be distracted with, but that definitely added to the stress of the moment.
So Nick, is your secret channel there, the Airbnb employees, is that going to become the new Reddit line?
They have like some channels for, people who are a little more aggressive for their investing and what they think about. But, my investment philosophy is a little bit more on the index fund side and trying to protect my assets, especially now that I've, acquired a significant portion at this point, and trying to keep that as stable as possible. I've had enough roller coasters over the past year and a half, from, investing in GameStop right now.
Yeah, no, we gotta get on that hot stock tip and on that Reddit or on that, Airbnb forum, get the news, man. You guys are going to be controlling the market here pretty soon, it sounds like.
Yeah, a lot of people suddenly coming on with all their money. So
totally. So when you plan to sell, are you going to move most of that? I mean, just walk me through as Nick makes money and as your money comes in, and it could be, these liquidity events or just in general, where does each dollar go? Top dollar, where does that go first? You put it in retirement accounts, the next go to the house. Like, how do you kind of think about diversifying and splitting up your money as it comes in?
Yeah. So I think that was a good part of having a plan before, of trying to sort of be aligned. There were things I knew I wanted to do right away when we went public, with the money. And first was paying off my wife's student loans. She works really hard. She's a nurse practitioner, and, she, worked really hard to get to where she was and took on, a lot of debt, to get to that role. So that was, definitely something I felt really proud and happy to do. And it met all of our financial goals. We're also getting our house ready for baby. We're in a relatively small house in Seattle, and we're doing some renovations and trying to update that. So I think there's just sort of trying to I say invest a little bit in myself and ourselves, just we haven't really had that luxury for a while. So that was sort of priority number one. But when it came to investing, what I'm probably going to do is almost certainly just I'm probably going to sell off a vast majority right away. I know there's some people who are talking about, maybe you sell off some shares over a period of time and try to do that. But I'm going to wait until I reach my long-term cap gains and then sell off, I think, a significant portion of shares and put it into a couple of different index funds. I generally put, a lot in, the total stock market index fund for Vanguard, and then a couple of REITs, tips, which are for inflation protection, and then some international exposure as well for bonds and in stocks as well, just to sort of get that a little bit on that to sort of ride if there's any volatility that you can sort of adjust if you need access to that capital. But that's sort of the plan for the time being. No interest in real estate? Actually, that's a good point. Yeah, yes. Well, I was talking to my wife about that. That's more of a 3 to 5 year goal, I think, where obviously, like, we own property. I've done Airbnbs at properties that, our house before. And, I understand that business. And, I think we're interested once, our life stabilizes a little bit in, 3 to 5 years, trying to, buy maybe, a single family or a multifamily and trying to, see how that goes. Just more from like a learning experience, but also trying to create, different sources of cash flow and income for us, as we start to, broaden our wealth basket.
Yeah, totally. So as you look out, I mean, do you plan on retiring at some point? Is there a number that would say, yeah, Nick's done, I'm gonna cash it in, I'm gonna kind of move into that next phase of life, or still kind of on the train of, let me just keep riding this, it's been fun, I'll reevaluate every so often?
Yeah, I think like I'm in the reevaluate category for now. Like I definitely enjoy my work. But I think a lot of my perspective, it'll be interesting to talk to me, 6 months from now when I have a kid and how that changes my perspective on things. But I imagine like I probably want to eventually start something different, work a little bit less, but a little bit more focused on maybe trying my own business somewhere or getting into, personal investing on, other people's small businesses or real estate, things like that, where, it's a different kind of work and one that you have more control over versus, the 9-to-5 job, and you have a little bit more flexibility in your day to day. And, that would be something that I'd probably eventually pivot to, I would say, probably like a 10-year horizon, I'm guessing.
Yeah, totally. Has there ever been like a net worth number that you've wanted to obtain, or a level of income, that might come off passively that you've ever strived for?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, I think hitting like the million mark is like just kind of cool, right? Because like I think that's something that you always grew up. You're like, oh, it's weird. Like, oh, I'm a millionaire. That's a kind of a weird thing. And that that hurdle was interesting. I think like longer term, I think it's more for me. Like I'm more in the trying to get to the net worth or income streams where like it can replace my current income from either, the investments we have or whatever that would look like. And, that might look for like where I live in a high cost of living place, upwards of like, say, like 5 million based on, like a more lavish lifestyle. But, we're also thinking about moving to a much lower cost living place. And if we did that, we could retire yesterday if we wanted to, probably, and do that. So for the time being, like we're happy here. And, I think if we want to sort of maintain that, keep the course, and hopefully if things go well, we'll be able to reach that goal of, just sort of offsetting our incomes, in the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. What does that look like for y'all for moving to a lower cost of living area or a little bit of geo arbitrage? I mean, do you have a place picked out, or is it just, hey, I want to get off the coast somewhere, that's lower cost of living. I don't really care where. Yeah.
I mean, it's a really good. So we've actually had an interesting experience on this because, my wife and I, we met in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and that's, just extremely expensive. And I just remember we were there and, we were in like a 2-bedroom apartment next to like a train station in Oakland. And, it wasn't, it was a fine area, but, we were paying a significant amount of our paychecks, for the apartment. And then, with the Airbnb job, we transferred up to Portland, Oregon. And, Portland's an expensive city, but the cost of living compared to San Francisco and Portland, our mortgage was less than our, 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland. And, with Seattle, it's higher cost of living. There are benefits here when you think about, where you want to move. There's for someone like myself where, you might be getting significant windfalls. There's a lot of tax implications for where you're living and where you vest the stock. And, we like Washington. We like the Pacific Northwest from like a lifestyle point of view. So like we're thinking, places, further outside of Washington, and, maybe going back to Oregon at some point. But for the time being, this is the area we like for both financial reasons because of the income benefits it has, but also because of the lifestyle and the things that we like outside of work.
Yeah, totally. Do your friends know of your wealth, or your family know of your wealth at all?
I don't talk to them like explicitly about the number. I think people assume because, for a long time, I didn't feel wealthy, right? Like I didn't have access. Like I said, and the roles I was having was more entry level. You're working with, like when I was at Facebook, I was, in an entry level operations position, and you have people who are engineers out of college making, multiple 6+ figures. And getting all this stuff, and you're scraping by, and now where I am, I've been able to navigate and grow my career, and I don't really share it, unless people really ask for it, to sort of talk through advice. It feels kind of awkward, but yeah, I mean, like I'm not opposed to it, but I just generally keep that private.
So Nick, let me just press you. You made one comment, like if you moved away or out of the expensive area, you could retire yesterday. Does that ever tempt you?
There are definitely some days where it tempts me, for sure. Like, I think, you can think about that. I think there's like a mental barrier from like when you've been in something for so long, and then moving to that. And, I'm more of a risk averse person. So like, I definitely know that's something I want to do at some point, but I think there's some stuff I have to do to get like, myself ready to make that kind of jump in, that kind of commitment. I think like the financial goals there are like where I would want to be, but how that would actually be in practice to pull the trigger is actually quite terrifying, and making sure you have health insurance, and that what your plan is, and making sure everything goes right, because you want everything to go right, and not to be in a situation where you have to like really pivot again, and go back and try to recoup lost ground, and to have to start all over again, I guess. But I know the logical side of my brain says that's more than likely not true, but the irrational part is that's the part that I'm trying to sort of deal with and try to prepare on that. But yeah, definitely think about that sometimes.
Yeah, and a big moving piece of that, and tech in a way is really leading the push on this, is the opportunity to work remotely. So is that something that you guys have talked about? And I guess I don't know I don't know Stripe's stance on it, but it seems like maybe you could move and still work for the same company.
Yeah, that is definitely. So I think for now, like one of the reasons we moved to Seattle was that like it gives me flexibility in my career. I'm fortunate because my wife is a nurse practitioner, so if we wanted to move remotely, like we could do that. The only thing that I think about on like the remote thing, like say if we moved, somewhere really remote that, if I wanted to stay in my profession or do something like that, like the opportunities that it would afford me in a remote it limits my ability to sort of stay in this particular career where I am right now. And I am kind of happy for the time being. But that said, like, I think that dynamic is changing pretty quickly. So, I think that's something that I'm watching pretty closely on how the working from home culture shifts, not just at Stripe, which I think is pretty friendly to remote work, but also other places, right? Like if I ever had to switch for whatever reason, that, there would be options there. And I think, if that becomes more of a stable, sort of landscape, that would definitely be something that I would take seriously into consideration to, move to a place that has more space and a better cost of living. And, we can keep our place in Seattle and rent it out, and then, move to a place, not too far away, and reduce our overhead a bit, and, enjoy the lifestyle that affords in those places where, you just get a lot more bang for your buck and a lot more space.
Yeah. So you mentioned home equity about $300,000. Is that right?
It's like, I would say like $250,000. It depends on the valuation of the home, I guess. But yeah, I would say it's like $250,000, $300,000.
And then you have about like 600 or 700 in the stock market if you don't count the Airbnb.
Yeah, that's, I would say, about accurate. There's like a significant amount, like 100,000 in cash right now, because we're doing some renovations on our house. We're in a small house. We bought the cliche. We bought the best, the worst house on the best block. It needs a lot of renovation, a lot of work, and we're trying to race against the baby timer to get an extra bathroom put in, and stuff like that. So we're doing some major renovations on our house right now. So that's why we have so much cash on hand.
Yeah. So let me ask Nick, and I think they ask this frequently on the How I Built This podcast. What percent of this is due to luck, and what percent of this is due to skill? Your story here.
I think so. I mean, there's, I definitely am lucky. I will not argue that. I've been able to be in positions where I was able to start this career and to, get the education that allowed me to get a foot in the door to these areas and to navigate that. But I do think there's a lot of hard work and play that you can once you're in those situations. So, if you're given luck, it's also how you use it, right? And you don't want to be the person who's really lucky, and then, you let that opportunity go by. And I worked really, really hard early in my career to build my experience and certain skills that made me get sort of more, leverage positions that I think were more in line with both the quality of life to get away from work I didn't like, but also to leverage that to other kinds of companies. And I think I've been particularly good at finding companies that I think are, on their way to, to being very, very successful and trying to navigate that. And I think there's some luck involved in that, but there's also a lot of work and a lot of effort to sort of build those skills to sort of be able to navigate those work environments and to, survive and frankly survive in some of those work environments, because in the safety side of things, it's not always easy. It can be a pretty grueling industry and a pretty hard place to work and a hard sort of line of work to work in as well. So
yeah, agree. So what drives you then and to be successful, to work hard, to save this money, to invest the money, to be where you're at? I mean, to earn the options, and has that shifted previously? I mean, did something different drive you 10 years ago?
I think it's a good question. It's something definitely, I mean, I think part of, early on, I was fortunate to be at Facebook when, they IPO'd, and I didn't know anything about finances. There was, stuff I learned, and I knew investing was good conceptually. And, at the time, I had made what I thought was, a pretty significant amount of money at the time. And, there's other people who made a lot more, obviously. But, for me, just starting my career, I didn't really know what to do with that. And I really was motivated more from a learning perspective at that point. And then, later on in a different role, I was really just unhappy in the job, right? And the role was not what I expected it to be. There was a lot of internal politics, and fortunately, things have changed, and I was able to navigate to other roles. But I think that really pushed me more once I started to learn about the finances more into hey, well, if I'm not happy and I don't want to do this, what's my next option? What are those out there? And that's when I really got more into, the retirement early sort of side of things. And, right now, for me is more I've been really trying to get to a stable place with all the movement, and I think settling down. And what's motivating me right now, honestly, is my family and trying to get our family started. And then I think at some point, I think we'll probably shift more towards spending more and more time with my family and trying to get into, different, I enjoy learning. I enjoy helping people. And, those are things that have been part of my career, and finding ways to use my skills in different ways, whether it's in my current career trajectory or down the road, or things that I find rewarding and hope to continue to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. Let me just jump into some rapid fire questions here, and then we'll end with some general mistakes and advice. So, what's been the most expensive meal out that you've personally paid for?
Probably we're foodies, but it's probably, I would say, a $400 meal for our anniversary, which was very, very good, and definitely a little bit of a splurge.
Okay, what about the most expensive car?
That would be our recent car. We've had we definitely splurged a little bit recently with the IPO, and we upgraded to an Audi Q5, which has been nice. And we're going to actually just use one car right now. So I had a lease. I'm getting rid of that car. That's definitely our most expensive car.
Okay. How old were you when you became a millionaire?
That's a good question. It really, I guess I technically was for a long time, right? Because I didn't, I think with Airbnb valuation, but I didn't necessarily have access to that. So it didn't necessarily feel that way, I guess. But I'd probably say probably around 30 is probably where my net worth probably passed around $1 million if you include the grant. But I would say probably over the summer when it really happened, when the Airbnb initial public offering, when I got access to the capital. The winter, not the summer.
Yeah. Okay. How much do you spend a year, annual household spending?
It's probably around 100,000, maybe more or less, depending on the year.
And has that increased as the net worth and income has increased, or did you keep it pretty constant?
I think it's increased a bit. Like we've done a lot of moving the past couple of years, so that's been expensive, more so than like normal. But trying to keep a budget and keep things at bay, but also trying to enjoy things a little bit too, and take the foot off the gas a little bit, and just trying to find the balance of the priorities, because money is important, but so is enjoying having the money and using on things that you enjoy.
Yeah. Did you ever have debt? Student debt, car debt, any type of debt?
I've always been, mortgages. We have a mortgage on our place, and we have mortgages on our previous property we owned in Portland. And I've always been kind of weird about, I've sort of debt averse, except for certain times. My wife, like I said, had student debt. But I always pay my credit card bill on time, have since I was, basically had the ability to do that. And I've sort of, for whatever reason, that's just something that's sort of ingrained in me.
Awesome. Range of household income, as much as you're comfortable sharing.
On like where I started to where I am now?
Yeah, correct.
Well, when I was, a teacher in Germany, and doing that, I was working off of like a stipend of like, I would say like 20,000 euros a year, something like that. It was a low cost of living place, but, had hourly jobs in high school and college as well, of, minimum wage to a little bit above minimum wage. But my first salary job, which was at Facebook, was probably like when I started like $45,000 a year. And currently, it varies depending on if you consider bonuses and stuff, but I would say it's like around $175,000 a year.
Good for you. Good for you. Any particular financial goal? Net worth, passive income?
I think, we definitely want to try our hand in real estate. So I think it's getting enough to invest in a property for like multifamily where we're comfortable with. We have that, but like getting to the balance where we're comfortable from an education. And the main goal, I would say, probably like we were talking about where we can live where we are right now, to offset our incomes, which is probably like around 5 million. That would probably be where we're aiming for. Okay, great. Any books or products you recommend? I really like the Bald Head Guide to Investing. I mean, it goes over, all of the basics of that, and they have some interesting tips in there. I'm also a little bit of, like I said, I understand how things sort of fail and come apart. I recommend The Big Short. It's a fun read. It's interesting to see how that goes. Another book called, I think This Time It's Different, where it's similar, where they just look at like different, companies or economic cycles, and sort of what happened on those. And I'm just interested in learning about those and sort of seeing if there's anything I can glean from that. For products, I mainly use, Mint to track my budget and personal finances, generally like that, and would recommend that to people. Okay, awesome. So, Nick, really good interview, and obviously you're polished and have been extremely successful. You hit Millionaire at 30, you got high income, you got these options, a pretty interesting and unique story that we haven't had on. So, first of all, obviously we're appreciative that you reached out, and thanks for coming on. But just in closing, what would be your advice to somebody who's just getting started, whether they're in their 20s or 25, and maybe they want to go the tech route, or maybe, whatever way you really want to spin it here, what would be your advice to somebody, and how were you able to do this so quickly? Sure. I think for people, so there's a couple of things. So like one, for people breaking into tech, like some good advice somebody gave me for something different. Like when I first started, in my career, I thought I was going to be like more in like public policy side of things. And, I had a professor tell me, he's like, if you want to be a politician, you go to Washington, D.C. If you want to be in finance, you go to New York. If you want to be in tech, you go to, San Francisco or Seattle. And, it is like when you're young, and to really understand like what the advantages you have in that situation, both with your age and your circumstance, and to really try to maximize that and not be afraid to like move and take those risks early on, to sort of get yourself established. I think for people getting into tech, it's, the hardest part, I think, is getting your foot in the door. Then once you're there, you really have to, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, and to invest in yourself, to say, to pursue things that might be outside of the role that you were hired into, because these companies are changing very, very quickly. And, if you're able to have a big impact, in different areas in the company, that's actually what they look for. For financial stuff, I think it's really like my advice is like read as much as you can and invest as much as you can as early on as you can. I feel fortunate I was able to invest and be in these companies early on, but I also like was trying early on to invest, even though I would say I made some mistakes along the way. I at least had some money in the market where I was able to start to build a little bit of a fund for myself and sort of learn the ropes, and where I'm now in a place where I've gone through all of that, over the past, 15 years or so. And I feel much more, aware and educated about my circumstance, and that I can make more informed decisions about what I want to do with my money.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I mean, really good advice and great overall interview. So thanks again for coming on, everybody. That's Nick, net worth of 2.5, right? If we include the Stripe share. So thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.